$10,000 in crisp, cold hundreds sat on the stained mahogany table, a green monument to arrogance. The restaurant, usually filled with the polite clinking of silverware, had gone deathly silent. Every pair of eyes in the room was fixed on two people: Nicholas Hughes, a man whose suit cost more than most people's cars, and Molly, a waitress with frayed shoelaces and a mind sharper than the steak knife in her hand. He thought he was buying her humiliation. He thought the money was safe. He didn't realize that in the next 60 seconds, he wouldn't just lose his money. He would lose his voice, his reputation, and his dignity. The silence wasn't fear. It was the calm before the storm. Molly Linley shifted the weight of the silver tray onto her left shoulder, feeling the familiar burn in her trapezius muscle. It was 8:15 p.m. on a rainy Tuesday in Seattle, and the Velvet Orchid was operating at full capacity. The restaurant was the kind of place where the lighting was dim enough to hide mistresses, but bright enough to catch the sparkle of diamonds. It smelled of truffle oil, aged cognac, and old money. For Molly, it smelled like rent. She navigated the narrow channels between tables with the grace of a dancer, a skill necessary for survival when carrying $40 worth of appetizers. She was 26, with dark circles under her eyes that she artfully concealed with concealer she'd bought at a drugstore discount bin. To the patrons of the Velvet Orchid, she was invisible, a pair of floating hands that delivered filet mignon and refilled wine glasses. They didn't know that 3 years ago she had been a doctoral candidate in applied mathematics at MIT. They didn't know about the sick mother, the crushing medical debt, or the decision to leave academia to work 3 jobs just to keep the lights on. To them, she was just Miss, or excuse me. "Excuse me, sweetie," a voice boomed from the center booth, cutting through the ambient jazz. Molly stiffened. She knew that voice. Everyone in the service industry in the downtown district knew that voice. It belonged to Nicholas Hughes. Nicholas was the heir to the Hughes real estate empire, a man who had never been told no in his 34 years of existence. He was seated in the prime booth, the one usually reserved for senators and visiting celebrities, surrounded by 3 other men who laughed too loudly at jokes that weren't funny. Nicholas wore a navy bespoke suit, the jacket unbuttoned to reveal a silk tie that shimmered under the chandelier light. His face was flushed with the ruddy complexion of someone who had started drinking at lunch. Molly took a deep breath, centered herself, and approached the table. "Good evening, gentlemen. How is everything tasting so far?" Nicholas didn't look up. He was busy swirling a glass of Pinot Noir, watching the red legs of the wine drip down the crystal. "The wine is acceptable," he said, his voice dripping with bored condescension. "But the service? That's lagging. We've been waiting for our appetizers for 12 minutes. "I apologize, sir," Molly said, her voice steady. "The kitchen is quite busy tonight, but I just checked on your order. The beef carpaccio is being plated right now." Nicholas finally looked up. His eyes were watery and blue, scanning her uniform with a look that made Molly feel like she needed a shower. "You checked? Or are you just saying that to shut me up?" "I checked, Mr. Hughes." He smirked, turning to his friends. "See? They learn my name. They think it gets them a bigger tip." The table erupted in sycophantic laughter. One of the men, a guy named Brett, who worked in venture capital, slapped the table. "She's just doing her job, Press," Brett said, though his tone lacked any real defense of her. "It's not a difficult job, is it?" Nicholas leaned back, stretching his arm over the plush leather of the booth. "You write down what I want, you bring it here. A monkey could do it with enough training. In fact, a monkey might be faster." Molly bit the inside of her cheek. The metallic taste of blood grounded her. Rent money, she repeated in her head. Prescriptions for Mum. Electric bill. I'll go ensure your appetizers are brought out immediately, Molly said, turning to leave. Don't walk away when I'm speaking to you, Nicholas snapped. The playfulness was gone, replaced by the petulance of a child. Molly stopped. She turned back slowly. Is there something else you need, sir? Nicholas stared at her, his ego bruised by her lack of visible fear. He hated when the help didn't look sufficiently cowed. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick money clip. He peeled off $100 bill and dropped it on the table. It wasn't a tip. It was bait. I need you to smile, Nicholas said. You look miserable. It ruins the ambiance. Molly looked at the bill, then at Nicholas. I'm here to serve food, sir. My expression comes free of charge. The table went silent. Nicholas's smile faltered, then widened into something predatory. He wasn't used to pushback. He liked pushback. It gave him something to crush. Feisty, Nicholas muttered. I like that. Tell you what. Keep the 100. Consider it a down payment on an apology for making us wait. I don't need your money, Mr. Hughes. I earn my paycheck. Nicholas laughed, a harsh, barking sound. You earned pennies. Don't pretend you have dignity, sweetheart. You're a waitress at a steakhouse. You serve meat to people who actually matter. Molly placed her hands behind her back, her fingers interlocking tightly to stop them from shaking. Is that all, sir? For now. Nicholas waved her away dismissively. Go fetch the food. Chop, chop. Molly walked toward the kitchen, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She pushed through the swinging doors into the chaotic heat of the kitchen. Order for table 4 is up, the expeditor shouted. Molly grabbed the plates. She had to go back out there. She had to serve him. She had to endure it. But as she adjusted the plates on her arm, a cold resolve settled in her stomach. Nicholas Hughes thought he was the apex predator in this room because he had a credit card with no limit. He was about to learn that intelligence wasn't determined by net worth. By 9:00 p.m., the atmosphere at table 4 had shifted from rowdy to belligerent. They were on their 3rd bottle of wine, a vintage Cabernet that cost more than Molly's monthly salary. Every time Molly or any other server approached the table, Nicholas found a new way to torment them. He sent back a steak because it was too rectangular. He complained that the water was too cold. But his focus kept returning to Molly. She was currently refilling their water glasses, moving with efficient, silent motions. Nicholas watched her, his eyes narrowed. He was bored. The wine had dulled his senses, and he needed a dopamine hit. He needed a show. Hey, Nicholas said, loud enough to stop the conversation at the neighboring tables. Einstein. Molly didn't flinch. She finished pouring the water for Brett before turning to Nicholas. Yes, Mr. Hughes. You think you're smart, don't you? He swirled his glass. I saw the way you looked at me earlier, like you're better than this, like you're judging us. I don't judge the customers, sir. Bullshit, Nicholas sneered. He slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware jump. You think because you can memorize a list of specials, you have a brain. Let me ask you something. What's 15% of 400? Molly stared at him. It was an insultingly simple question. 60, sir. Nicholas clapped mockingly. Bravo. Give the girl a gold star. She can do 3rd grade math. He turned to his friends. See, I told you. Basic cognitive functions. Barely. Leave her alone, Nicholas, Brett muttered, looking uncomfortable. People are staring. Let them stare. Nicholas stood up. He was a tall man, looming over the table, swaying slightly. I'm sick of this mediocrity. Everywhere I go, incompetence. This girl probably thinks she's a genius because she knows the difference between sparkling and still. Molly looked him in the eye. Mr. Hughes, please sit down. You're disturbing the other guests." "I am the other guests," Nicholas shouted. "I pay for this place. I could buy this building and turn it into a parking lot tomorrow if I wanted to." The manager, a nervous man named Arthur Pendleton, hurried over, wringing his hands. "Mr. Hughes, is there a problem? Can I get you a complimentary dessert?" Nicholas ignored Arthur. He was locked on to Molly. He saw the intelligence in her eyes, the defiance he hadn't managed to extinguish, and it infuriated him. He wanted to break her. He wanted to prove that she was nothing. "I have a proposition," Nicholas said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, silky register. He reached into his inner suit jacket pocket. Everyone watched as he pulled out a thick envelope. He tossed it onto the table. It landed with a heavy thud. "That," Nicholas announced, pointing a manicured finger at the envelope, "is $10,000. Cash. I was going to use it for a weekend in Vegas, but I'm feeling generous." Molly didn't look at the money. She looked at Nicholas. "I'm not interested in your games." "Scared?" Nicholas taunted. "Of course you are. You know you're out of your depth." "I have work to do." Molly turned to leave. "If you walk away," Nicholas shouted, "I will call the owner of this chain, who I play golf with every Sunday, and I will have you fired. I'll make sure you're blacklisted from every decent restaurant in the city. You'll be flipping burgers in a hairnet by Monday." Molly froze. She knew he wasn't bluffing. Men like Nicholas Hughes didn't bluff. They destroyed. She thought of her mother's medication sitting on the kitchen counter, the overdue notice for the electric bill, the sheer fragility of her existence. She couldn't lose this job. She turned back slowly. "What do you want?" Nicholas grinned. It was the smile of a shark scenting blood in the water. "A bet. A test of intellect. Since you think you're so clever." He reached for the linen napkin on his lap, snapped it open, and placed it in the center of the table. He then grabbed a silver pen from his pocket. "I'm going to give you a puzzle," Nicholas said. "A logic problem. Something they teach in the Ivy League schools you could never dream of attending." The restaurant had gone silent. Even the kitchen staff had paused, peering through the service window. The air was thick with tension. "If you solve it," Nicholas said, gesturing to the envelope, "the 10,000 is yours. No strings attached. You take the cash, you walk out of here, and you never have to serve a guy like me again." "And if I fail?" Molly asked, her voice cool and controlled. "If you fail," Nicholas leaned in, his breath reeking of expensive wine, "you have to get on your knees, right here, in front of everyone, and apologize. You have to say, 'I am a stupid, incompetent servant, and Mr. Hughes is my better.'" Loudly. Arthur, the manager, stepped forward. "Mr. Hughes, I really don't think this is a "Shut up, Arthur," Nicholas snapped without looking at him. He kept his eyes on Molly. "Well, do we have a deal? Or are you going to run away and accept that you're a nobody?" Molly looked at the envelope. $10,000. That was 6 months of rent. That was the specialist her mother needed. That was freedom. She looked at Nicholas. He was confident. He had done this before. He had a trick, a trap, something he used to humiliate people at parties. He thought she was just a waitress. He saw the apron, not the woman wearing it. She remembered the nights in the MIT library, the complex algorithms, the beauty of pure logic. She remembered why she loved math, because unlike people, math didn't lie. Math didn't care how rich you were. Molly took a step forward, entering the lion's den. "You have a deal," she said. The room gasped. Nicholas's smile widened. He uncapped his pen. "Excellent," he purred. "Pay attention, darling. I'm only going to draw this once." The restaurant, usually a symphony of clinking crystal and hushed conversations, had transformed into an arena. The air was heavy, charged with the static of anticipation. Diners at surrounding tables had abandoned their lobster bisques and prime ribs, rotating their chairs to get a better view of table 4. Even the line cooks, usually hidden behind the stainless steel pass, were craning their necks, their white toques bobbing like buoys in a harbour. Nicholas Hughes sat like a king holding court, the silver pen gleaming in his hand. He smoothed out the white linen napkin, pressing it flat against the dark wood of the table. "Pay attention," Nicholas said, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. "I don't repeat myself for the help." He drew 3 small squares in a horizontal row at the top of the napkin. Beneath them, spaced widely apart, he drew 3 circles. He labelled the squares A, B, and C. He labelled the circles gas, water, and electric. "This," Nicholas said, gesturing with the tip of the pen, "is a neighbourhood. 3 houses at the top, 3 utility companies at the bottom." Molly watched his hand. She didn't look at his face. She watched the ink bleed slightly into the high thread-count cotton. "The rules are simple," Nicholas continued, leaning back and crossing his arms, a smug grin plastering his face. "You must draw a line from the gas company to House A, House B, and House C. Then you must do the same for water and electric. Every house needs every utility." He paused for effect, letting his gaze sweep over his sycophantic friends, Brett and a man named Roger, who were snickering into their wine glasses. "Here is the catch," Nicholas said, his eyes snapping back to Molly. "None of the lines can cross. Not once. If a line touches another line, you lose. If you lift the pen and start over more than once, you lose. And—" He checked the Rolex Submariner on his wrist, a watch worth more than Molly's entire student loan debt. "You have exactly 60 seconds. A murmur went through the crowd. From a distance, it looked easy. Just drawing lines. How hard could it be? 60 seconds, Arthur, the manager, squeaked. "Mr. Hughes, surely." "Time starts when you pick up the pen," Nicholas interrupted, sliding the napkin and the silver pen toward Molly. "Go." Molly looked down at the diagram. To the untrained eye, it was a child's doodle. To the venture capitalist Brett, it was a bar trick. But to Molly Linley, former doctoral candidate in applied mathematics, it was something else entirely. It was the classical water, gas, and electricity puzzle. In the world of graph theory, it was known as the utility graph, or showdown 3 on Artimotuas. Her mind immediately flashed back to a lecture hall in Cambridge, the smell of chalk dust and old coffee. Professor Halloway, no relation to the man in front of her, standing before a blackboard covered in equations. Euler's formula for planar graphs, he had said. Vertices minus edges plus faces equals 2. Var wasta I platsa effe $2. Molly's brain crunched the numbers instinctively, faster than she could blink. In this graph there were 6 vertices, the 3 houses and 3 utilities, and 9 edges, the connection lines. If drawn on a flat plane without crossing, it would imply a certain number of faces. But the math didn't hold up. The formula proved, unequivocally, that embedding this specific graph on a flat, 2-dimensional plane without intersection was impossible. It wasn't a puzzle. It was a mathematical impossibility. Nicholas wasn't testing her intelligence. He was banking on her ignorance. He knew it couldn't be done. He had set her up to fail before she even uncapped the pen. He wanted to watch her scribble frantically, crossing lines in panic, sweating as the seconds ticked by, only to laugh and reveal that it was a trick all along. He wanted to watch her hope die. "Clock is ticking, Einstein," Nicholas taunted. 40 seconds left. "Don't tell me you're stumped already? I thought you were smart." Brett laughed. "She's freezing up, Press. Look at her. Cat got your tongue? Nicholas goaded, tapping the table rhythmically. Come on, draw a line. Any line. Humour me. Molly stood perfectly still. The sounds of the restaurant faded into a dull roar. She looked at the napkin. A flat plane. Euclidean geometry. Impossible. But then her eyes narrowed. She looked at the texture of the cloth. She looked at the edges of the napkin. Nicholas had presented a problem of topology. But in his arrogance, he had made a critical error. He was a businessman, not a mathematician. He had memorized the trick, but he didn't understand the theory. He had drawn the puzzle on a napkin. A napkin was not a theoretical 2D plane. A napkin was a physical object. It existed in three-dimensional space. It was pliable. It could be manipulated. The solution to care 3 or 3 sol was impossible on a plane, a sheet of paper, but it was entirely possible on a torus, a donut shape. A spark ignited in Molly's chest. It wasn't fear anymore. It was the thrill of the solve. She realized she didn't just have a way to solve the puzzle. She had a way to humiliate him, using the very laws of the universe he was trying to use against her. 30 seconds, Nicholas barked. Better get those knees ready, sweetheart. The floor looks a little dirty tonight. Molly reached out. Her hand was steady. She didn't pick up the pen immediately. Instead, she picked up the napkin. Hey! Nicholas shouted. What are you doing? Put it down! You said I had to connect them, Molly said, her voice cutting through the room like a bell. You didn't say the napkin had to stay flat. She saw the confusion flicker in Nicholas's eyes. He hadn't anticipated this. Molly moved with the precision of a surgeon. She folded the top edge of the napkin down and the bottom edge up. She wasn't just folding laundry. She was constructing a topological bridge. 10 seconds, Nicholas yelled, though his voice lacked the earlier punch. He was watching her hands, mesmerized. Molly grabbed the pen. The room was so quiet you could hear the hum of the refrigerator compressors from the kitchen. All eyes were glued to Molly's hands. She uncapped the silver pen. The clock in her head was ticking down. 5. 4. She didn't scribble. She drew with confident, sweeping strokes. First, she connected the gas circle to House A, House B, and House C. Simple. Next, she connected the water circle to House A, House B, and House C. The lines wove around the first set, filling the center of the napkin. The napkin was getting crowded. This was the choke point. This was where the trap usually sprang. The electric circle was blocked off from House B by the other lines. On a flat piece of paper, this would be the end. There was no path that didn't cross a line. But Molly wasn't playing on a flat piece of paper. She held the napkin up with her left hand, curling it into a cylinder, bringing the left and right edges together. By manipulating the fabric, she changed the geometry of the surface itself. "What is she doing?" Roger whispered, his mouth hanging open. "She's cheating!" Nicholas sputtered, starting to rise from his seat. "That's not—" "Sit down," Molly commanded, not looking up. Her voice had a ferocity that slammed Nicholas back into the leather booth. With the napkin curled, the impossible barrier vanished. The space behind the puzzle was now accessible. Molly drew the final line from the electric circle. Instead of trying to force it through the center tangle, she drew it off the right edge of the napkin. Because she had curled the cloth, the line she drew off the right edge naturally met the left edge. She continued the line from the left side, bringing it straight to House B, unobstructed. It was a perfect solution. She had utilized the third dimension to solve a two-dimensional impossibility. She had turned the napkin into a cylinder, topologically equivalent to a punctured plane, allowing the lines to bypass each other. She capped the pen with a sharp click. "Done," Molly said. She dropped the napkin onto the table. It uncurled slowly, revealing the spiderweb of ink. To a layman, it looked like a line went off the edge, and reappeared on the other side. To anyone with a brain, it was a valid connection. Total silence. Nicholas stared at the napkin. His face had gone a shade of pale, usually reserved for the deceased. He traced the lines with his eyes, desperate to find a fault. He looked for a cross. He looked for a break. Gas to A, B, C, connected. Water to A, B, C, connected. Electric to A, B, C, connected. No lines crossed. Nicholas's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. But you went off the edge. That's not allowed. Show me the rule, Molly said, crossing her arms. She stood tall, her waitress uniform suddenly looking like armor. You said, connect the houses to the utilities. You said, don't cross the lines. You said, don't lift the pen more than once. I followed every single one of your instructions, Mr. Hughes. She leaned in, placing her palms on the table, invading his space. You tried to give me the K for $3 graph, she said, her voice low and dangerous. Euler's formula dictates it is non-planar. It is mathematically impossible to solve on a flat Euclidean plane. You knew that. You were trying to scam me. A gasp went through the room. Nicholas flinched as if she had slapped him. However, Molly continued, her voice gaining volume, ensuring the entire restaurant heard her. We aren't living in a theoretical 2D world, and this isn't a sheet of graph paper. It's a linen napkin. By folding it, I transformed the surface topology. I created a bridge. In the world of applied mathematics, Mr. Hughes, that is called thinking outside the box, something you clearly know nothing about. Brett covered his mouth to hide a laugh. The tension in the room broke, replaced by a wave of shock and awe. A slow clap started from the back of the room. It was the old man in the corner booth, a retired judge who dined there every Tuesday. Then a couple at the next table joined in. Then the bar staff. Then the entire room erupted. It wasn't polite applause. It was thunderous. It was the sound of 50 people who had watched a bully get dissected with a silver pen. Nicholas sat frozen. His face turned from pale to a deep, humiliating crimson. He looked at his friends, hoping for backup. But Brett was looking at the ceiling, and Roger was suddenly very interested in his fingernails. He was alone. Molly stood there, the applause washing over her. She didn't smile. She just kept her hand extended, palm open. The envelope, Mr. Hughes, she said. Nicholas looked at the thick envelope of cash. $10,000. He had thrown it down like it was trash, assuming it would never leave his possession. Now, it was the only thing standing between him and a total public meltdown. His hand shook as he reached for it. He didn't want to give it up. It wasn't the money. He blew 10 grand on weekend trips. It was the defeat. It was the fact that a waitress, a girl he deemed beneath his notice, had outsmarted him in front of his peers. You tricked me, Nicholas hissed, his voice trembling with rage. You hustled me. I solved the puzzle, Molly corrected. A bet is a bet. Unless the great Nicholas Hughes is a Welsher. Is that what I should tell the owner when he asks why his customers are upset? That you don't pay your debts? Nicholas grit his teeth so hard a vein popped in his forehead. He snatched the envelope and shoved it toward her. It slid across the table and hit her hand. Take it, he spat. Take it and get out of my sight. Molly picked up the envelope. It felt heavy. It felt like justice. Thank you, sir, she said, her voice dripping with professional courtesy. I'll go put this in a safe place. Your appetizers will be out shortly. She turned on her heel and walked away. But the drama wasn't over. Nicholas wasn't the kind of man to let a loss lie. As Molly walked toward the kitchen, the applause dying down, Nicholas stood up. His ego was bleeding out, and he needed to hurt someone. "Hey!" Nicholas screamed, his voice cracking. Molly stopped. She didn't turn around. "You think you're smart?" Nicholas yelled, knocking his wine glass over. Red wine soaked the white tablecloth, staining the solution Molly had just drawn. "You're still just a servant. You hear me? You're a nobody with a party trick. Tomorrow I'll still be rich, and you'll still be fetching steak for people better than you." The room went deadly silent again. The cruelty was raw, desperate. Molly turned around slowly. The envelope was tucked securely in her apron. She looked at Nicholas, who was panting, his suit stained with wine, looking less like a titan of industry and more like a toddler having a tantrum. She walked back to the table. She didn't stop until she was 2 feet away from him. "Mr. Hughes," she said softly, "you asked me earlier what 15% of 400 was." Nicholas stared at her, breathing heavily. "You asked because you think that's the limit of what someone like me should know," Molly said. "But 3 years ago, I was researching algorithmic topology at MIT before my mother got sick. I left to pay for her chemotherapy. I served tables because I love her more than I love my ego." She gestured to the wine-stained napkin. "You have money, Nicholas, that's true. But money is just a resource. Intelligence, character, class." She looked him up and down with a pity that burned worse than hatred. "Those are things you can't buy. And tonight, you just proved you're bankrupt in everything that matters." She pulled a $10 bill from her own tip jar in her apron, her own money, and dropped it onto the wine-soaked table. "For the dry cleaning," she said. Molly walked away. And this time, Nicholas Hughes didn't say a word. He couldn't. The silence in the room was so absolute, so heavy with judgment, that it felt like he was drowning in it. He slumped back into the booth, the wet stain spreading across his lap, as the eyes of everyone in the Velvet Orchid burned into him. He had lost $10,000, but he knew, with a sinking dread, that the story of tonight would cost him much, much more. The adrenaline crash hit Molly the moment she stepped off the number 4 bus. The rain had turned into a relentless Seattle drizzle, coating the pavement in a slick, grey sheen. She clutched her tote bag to her chest, her arm pressing against the hard rectangle of the envelope hidden inside. $10,000. It felt like she was carrying a bomb. She walked the 3 blocks to her apartment complex, a drab brick building called The Cedars that hadn't seen a cedar tree or a fresh coat of paint since the 90s. Her knees were still shaking, not from the cold, but from the aftershocks of the confrontation. She had stood up to Nicholas Hughes. She had won. But as she climbed the 3 flights of stairs to apartment 3B, the euphoria was replaced by a creeping dread. Men like Nicholas didn't lose. They only rearranged the board until they won. She unlocked the door, the familiar scent of lavender and antiseptic washing over her. "Molly, is that you?" A weak voice called from the bedroom. "It's me, Mom," Molly called back, forcing a cheerfulness into her voice she didn't feel. She walked into the bedroom. Sarah Linley lay propped up against a mountain of pillows. She was only 55, but the illness had aged her 20 years. Her skin was papery, her eyes bright but sunken. On the bedside table sat a terrifying array of orange prescription bottles, half of them empty. "You're late," Sarah whispered, reaching out a frail hand. "Did the dinner shift run long?" Molly sat on the edge of the bed, taking her mother's hand. It was cold. "Yeah, Mum, it was eventful." "Did you get good tips?" Molly looked at her mother. She thought about the unpaid specialist bill sitting on the kitchen counter. She thought about the pharmacy that wouldn't refill the pain meds until the balance was cleared. Slowly, Molly reached into her bag and pulled out the envelope. She opened the flap and fanned out the stack of $100 bills. Sarah's eyes widened. She tried to sit up, gasping. "Molly, what is that? Did you tell me you didn't do something foolish?" "I won it, Mom," Molly said, tears finally spilling over. "I won a contest, a math contest at the restaurant. It's real. It's ours." They cried together, holding the money that meant another 6 months of life, another chance at fighting the sickness. For a few hours in the safety of that dim apartment, the victory felt absolute. But across town, in a penthouse overlooking the Puget Sound, the mood was very different. Nicholas Hughes paced the length of his living room, a glass of scotch in his hand. He had stripped off the wine-stained suit, but he couldn't wash away the feeling of the restaurant's eyes on him. The humiliation burned under his skin like a fever. His phone buzzed on the glass coffee table. It was Brett. "Dude, don't look at Twitter." Nicholas froze. He snatched the phone up. He didn't have Twitter, but he had Instagram. He opened the search bar. He didn't even have to type his name. It was trending locally. Math waitress. Hughes served orklash, eat the rich. He clicked the first video. It was a shaky recording, likely taken by a patron at a nearby table. The audio was crisp. Intelligence, character, class, those are things you can't buy. There he was, on a screen that would reach millions, looking like a petulant child while the waitress dissected his soul. The video cut to him shoving the money at her, his face twisted in ugly rage. The comments were scrolling so fast they were a blur. "Who is this guy? What a loser! That girl is a genius! Euler's formula, FTW! Boycott Hughes real estate! Trash human!" Nicholas hurled his glass against the wall. It shattered, amber liquid running down the expensive drywall. "She thinks she can humiliate me?" Nicholas screamed to the empty room. "She thinks she can take my money and my reputation?" He grabbed his phone and dialed a number he knew by heart. It rang twice before a smooth, deep voice answered. "This is Clinton Weathers." Clinton Weathers was not just a lawyer. He was a shark in a 3-piece suit. He was the managing partner at Weathers, Kincaid & Moore, the firm the Hughes family had used for 3 generations to bury their scandals. "Clinton," Nicholas snarled, "I have a situation. A waitress at the Velvet Orchid. I want her destroyed." "I saw the video, Nicholas," Clinton said, his voice devoid of sympathy. "It's already at 200,000 views. You look unfavorable. I don't care how I look. I want her fired. I want her sued. She scammed me. She used a trick to steal 10 grand. It was a verbal contract, Nicholas. On video, you lost." "I don't pay you to tell me I lost," Nicholas roared. "Find something. Accuse her of theft. Accuse her of assault. I don't care. Just make sure that by tomorrow morning, she wishes she had never learned to add 2 plus 2. There was a pause on the line, the sound of a heavy pen scratching on paper. "I can have a cease and desist drafted for fraudulent inducement regarding the bet," Clinton said slowly. "It won't hold up in court, but it will scare her. As for the job, I know the owner of the restaurant group, Mr. Forcher. I can make a call." "Do it," Nicholas hissed. "And Clinton, get me her full name. I want to know everything. Where she lives, who she loves, what she owes. I want to burn it all down." The next morning, the rain had stopped, but the sky remained a bruised purple. Molly arrived at the Velvet Orchid at 10 a.m. for the lunch prep shift. She felt lighter than she had in years. She had deposited the money first thing in the morning. The medical bills were paid. For the first time, she walked through the service entrance with her head held high. She tied her apron and walked into the kitchen. The chatter stopped instantly. Usually the kitchen was a cacophony of shouting, chopping, and sizzling. Now the line cooks looked at their cutting boards. The dishwasher, a friendly teenager named Toby, looked away when she waved. "Molly," a voice called from the office door. It was Arthur, the manager. He looked pale. He looked like he hadn't slept. "In my office? Now." Molly felt a cold stone drop in her stomach. She walked into the cramped office. Arthur closed the door and didn't sit down. He couldn't look her in the eye. "I have to let you go," Arthur said to the floor. Molly blinked. "What?" "Arthur, you can't be serious. Because of Hughes? He harassed me." "It's not up to me, Molly," Arthur said, his voice trembling. "The order came from corporate, from Mr. Forcher himself. They're saying you antagonized a VIP guest, that you engaged in illicit gambling on company property." "Gambling? He forced me into it. The whole restaurant saw it." "It doesn't matter," Arthur snapped, finally looking at her. His eyes were wet. "Molly, listen to me. Nicholas Hughes called the owner. He threatened to pull his real estate contracts with the holding group. He threatened to sue the restaurant for facilitating fraud. You are a liability. I have to terminate you, effective immediately." "I did nothing wrong," Molly said, her voice shaking. "I know," Arthur whispered. He reached into his desk and pulled out an envelope. It wasn't a severance check. It was a white letter with the heavy embossed logo of Weathers, Kincaid and Moore. "And a courier dropped this off for you 10 minutes ago." Molly took the letter. She tore it open. Notice of intent to sue. Nicholas Hughes vs. Molly Linley. Claim, fraudulent inducement, theft by deception, emotional distress. Demand, immediate return of $10,000 USD plus legal fees, and a public, video-recorded apology to be distributed on all social media platforms. Molly laughed. It was a dry, brittle sound. He wants an apology? For what? For being smarter than him? "He's a billionaire, Molly," Arthur said gently. "He can keep you in court until you starve. He's not trying to get the money back. He's trying to break you." Molly stared at the letter. The joy of the morning evaporated. She was unemployed again. And now she was being hunted by a legal team that cost more per hour than she made in a year. "Get your things," Arthur said softly. "I'm sorry." Molly walked out of the restaurant. She stood on the sidewalk, the letter crunched in her hand. Her phone buzzed. A text from her landlord. "Hey Molly, just got a weird call from a credit agency asking about your lease eligibility. Is everything okay?" He was moving fast. He was attacking her stability from every angle. Molly felt the panic rising, a black tide threatening to drown her. She had the money. But for how long? If they sued her, the legal fees would drain the $10,000 in a week. She sat on a damp bench near the bus stop, burying her face in her hands. She had poked the bear, and the bear was tearing her life apart. "Excuse me?" Molly didn't look up. "I don't have any change." "I'm not asking for change. Are you Molly Linley?" The voice was crisp, accented. British, maybe. Molly looked up. Standing in front of her was a woman who looked like she had stepped out of a fashion magazine. She wore a sharp trench coat, stiletto heels, and held a black umbrella. She was holding a tablet. "Who are you?" Molly asked, gripping her bag. "Did Hughes send you?" The woman smiled. It wasn't a cruel smile. It was professional, assessing. "Hardly," the woman said. "My name is Elena Rostova. I work for Warren Fitch." Molly froze. Warren Fitch. The name was legendary. He was the founder of Nexus Dynamics, the largest tech conglomerate in the Pacific Northwest. He was a recluse, a genius, and a man who had more money than Nicholas Hughes could count in 10 lifetimes. "Warren Fitch," Molly repeated. Why are you here?" "Mr. Fitch saw the video," Elena said. She tapped her tablet, and a hologram of the napkin graph floated in the air between them. "He was quite impressed, not by the math. Any first-year student knows the utility graph problem. He was impressed by the application. The folding of the plane, it showed a capacity for lateral thinking that is rare. I'm currently being sued for that lateral thinking, Molly said bitterly. We know, Elena said. Mr. Fitch has a very capable intelligence division. We know about the lawsuit. We know you were just fired. We know about your mother's condition. Molly stood up, anger flaring. Is this a game to you people? Another rich guy who wants to see the circus animal perform? No, Elena said. She took a step closer. Mr. Hughes is a bully with a checkbook. Mr. Fitch is an innovator, and he hates bullies. Specifically, he hates the Hughes family. They have a history regarding a certain land deal in 2018. Elena reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a card. It was made of black metal with a single gold chip embedded in the corner. Mr. Fitch has a proposition for you, Elena said. Nicholas Hughes thinks he can crush you with his wallet. Mr. Fitch would like to give you a bigger wallet to hit back with. I don't want charity, Molly said firmly. It's not charity. It's a job interview, Elena corrected. But first, we need to deal with your pest problem. Mr. Fitch has already retained a lawyer for you. Perhaps you've heard of Donovan and Stark. Molly's jaw dropped. Donovan and Stark was the only law firm in the city that Weathers, Kincaid and Moore was afraid of. They were the pit bulls of corporate litigation. Why? Molly asked. Why help me? Because, Elena said, her eyes twinkling, Mr. Fitch believes that raw intelligence is the most valuable currency on Earth, and he wants to see what happens when someone like you is given the same weapons as someone like Nicholas. Elena handed her the black card. The car is waiting around the corner, Miss Linley. We have a meeting to get to, and I suggest you check your phone. Mr. Fitch just retweeted your video. Molly looked at her phone. Her notifications were frozen. The number was ticking up so fast the screen couldn't keep up. Warren Fitch. Wob W. Fitch Nexus. Topological genius in action. This is the kind of mind we need. Shame on or Hughes Est for punishing brilliance. Molly, call me. The tweet had 10 million views in 20 minutes. Molly looked back at Elena. The despair that had choked her moments ago was gone, replaced by a surge of adrenaline that was sharper, colder, and more powerful than before. Nicholas had brought a knife to a gunfight. He didn't realize Molly had just been handed a bazooka. Let's go, Molly said. 3 days later, the grand ballroom of the Fairmont Olympic Hotel was awash in golden light. It was the night of the Hughes Foundation Gala, an annual event where Seattle's elite gathered to pat themselves on the back for being wealthy. Nicholas Hughes stood at the podium, gripping the sides with white-knuckled intensity. He looked tired. The Twitter storm had raged for 48 hours, but his PR team had worked overtime to bury it. They had bought bots, planted stories about his philanthropy, and threatened legal action against platforms hosting the video. He forced a smile as he looked out at the sea of tuxedos and gowns. Tonight, Nicholas said into the microphone, his voice booming through the speakers, is about resilience. It is about character. The Hughes family has always stood for integrity. A ripple of polite applause moved through the room, though many guests exchanged skeptical glances. Everyone had seen the video. Everyone knew about the lawsuit against the Waitress. But in this circle, money usually silenced morality. And, Nicholas continued, feeling his confidence return, I am thrilled to announce that tonight, Hughes Real Estate will be finalizing a partnership with Nexus Dynamics to develop the new Skyline District. This deal will solidify our legacy for the next century. He looked toward the front table, reserved for Nexus executives. It was empty. Nicholas frowned. Warren Fitch was never late. Suddenly, The heavy double doors at the back of the ballroom swung open. The sound echoed like a gunshot. The room fell silent. Walking down the center aisle wasn't Warren Fitch. It was Molly. She wasn't wearing an apron. She was wearing a floor-length gown of deep emerald silk that shimmered like liquid under the chandeliers. Her hair, usually tied back in a messy bun, cascaded in waves over her shoulders. She didn't look like a waitress. She looked like a queen coming to claim her throne. Walking a step behind her was Warren Fitch, the tech mogul himself, looking grim and powerful in a black tuxedo. Flanking them were two sharp-suited lawyers from Donovan and Stark. Nicholas froze. The color drained from his face. "Security!" he barked into the microphone. "Remove this woman! She's a trespasser!" Two security guards stepped forward, but Warren Fitch held up a single hand. The guards stopped dead. Fitch owned the security company that guarded the hotel. Molly didn't stop until she reached the foot of the stage. She looked up at Nicholas, who was now trembling with a mixture of rage and terror. "I'm not trespassing, Nicholas," Molly said. Her voice wasn't amplified by a microphone, but in the dead silence of the ballroom, it carried to the rafters. "I'm here representing Nexus Dynamics." The crowd gasped. Whispers erupted like wildfire. "You!" Nicholas scoffed, trying to laugh, but it came out as a strangled croak. "You serve steak. You don't represent a Fortune 500 company." Warren Fitch stepped forward. He took a microphone from a stunned MC. "Actually," Warren said, his voice cool and detached, "Ms. Linley is the newest consultant for our Applied Logic division, and as of this morning, she has full power of attorney regarding the Skyline deal." Nicholas's knees buckled. He grabbed the podium for support. "Warren, surely you can't be serious. This girl? She's a nobody. She tricked me with a napkin." "She demonstrated superior problem-solving skills under pressure," Warren corrected. "Something you severely lack. And speaking of the deal," Warren turned to Molly, "the floor is yours." Molly stepped onto the stage. She walked past Nicholas, ignoring him completely, and stood at the podium. She looked out at the crowd, the same people who had ignored her at the restaurant, the same people who looked through service workers as if they were glass. "Mr. Hughes proposes a partnership," Molly said, her voice steady and commanding. "He wants Nexus to invest $200 million into his firm. However, during my due diligence over the last 48 hours, I found a few calculation errors." She pulled a remote from her clutch and clicked it. The massive projection screen behind her, which displayed the Hughes logo, flickered and changed. It now showed a complex web of shell companies and offshore accounts. "It seems Mr. Hughes has been using a Ponzi structure to inflate his asset values," Molly explained, pointing to the screen. "He's been robbing Peter to pay Paul. Mathematically speaking, his empire is a negative equation. It's insoluble." The room erupted. Flashbulbs went off like strobe lights. Reporters who had been bored in the back row were now sprinting toward the stage. Nicholas lunged at her. "You lie! You verify nothing! You're a waitress!" One of the Donovan and Stark lawyers stepped in front of Nicholas, handing him a thick document. "Mr. Hughes," the lawyer said calmly, "this is a countersuit for defamation, wrongful termination, and malicious prosecution on behalf of Miss Linley. We are also filing a formal complaint with the SEC regarding these financial discrepancies. I suggest you call your lawyer. Though I hear Clinton Weathers resigned this morning." Nicholas looked at the document, then at the screen, then at the crowd. His friends, Brett, Roger, the people he tried to impress, were turning their backs on him. They were walking away. He looked at Molly. She wasn't gloating. She wasn't smiling with malice. She just looked disappointed. You asked me a logic puzzle, Nicholas, Molly said softly, loud enough only for him to hear. You wanted to know if I could connect the houses without crossing the lines, but you forgot the most important rule of topology. Nicholas stared at her, his eyes hollow. What? You can't build a structure on a foundation that doesn't exist, she said. You're the empty set, Nicholas. Molly turned and walked off the stage. Warren Fitch offered her his arm. Ready to go? We have a lot of work to do on Monday. Ready, Molly said. They walked out of the ballroom, leaving Nicholas Hughes alone on the stage, surrounded by the ruins of his reputation as the flashbulbs blinded him. 6 months later. Molly sat in her corner office at Nexus Dynamics, overlooking the Seattle skyline. The rain hit the glass, but inside it was warm and quiet. On her desk sat a framed photo of her mother, who was now in remission thanks to the experimental treatment Molly's new salary could afford. Next to the photo sat a silver pen and a linen napkin with a drawing of 3 squares and 3 circles. Her assistant knocked on the door. Ms. Linley, the update on the Hughes bankruptcy auction just came in. They're selling off the Velvet Orchid. Molly smiled. She picked up the pen. Buy it, she said. I have some ideas for the management. She looked at the napkin one last time. Nicholas had bet $10,000 that she would fail. In the end, that bet had cost him everything, and it had given her the world. It turned out the most dangerous variable in the room wasn't the money. It was the waitress he didn't see coming. And that is the story of how arrogance became the architect of its own destruction. Nicholas Hughes thought his wealth made him invincible, but he forgot that the sharpest weapon isn't a checkbook. It's a mind that refuses to be limited by the rules others set. Molly didn't just solve a puzzle, she solved the problem of her own life by refusing to accept the impossible. I hope you enjoyed this story of karma, intelligence, and justice served cold. If you felt that satisfaction when Molly walked into the gala, do me a huge favor. Hit that like button to help this story reach more people. Share this video with a friend who needs a reminder that the underdog can win. And if you want more stories about justice and turning the tables, make sure to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next story.